So Adam, let's talk a little bit more about the book Easy Riders Raging Bulls. We mentioned that Sidney Lumet's book was pretty influential. I do also do know a bunch of recent directors, including the one of Denis Villeneuve and the one who did Margin Call and all the one with Robert
PC
Redford.
Changer.
Yeah, that guy. The some of the later directors, so even some of the more recent directors have been reading it. How many, what do you think the influence of this book has been, other than just a lot of kind of fun stories and gossip, and I think it mythologizes the people a lot more.
Well, I mean, on the positive side, I think it encouraged people to go back and look at some of the great films from that decade. I think we already discussed on the negative side. I did feel it ventured a little further into the sex and drugs part than I would have liked, but I understand he wants to sell books. That's what I hope the impact is. I mean, certainly, I mean, he did. Biskin did another film about the '90s, Go Down in Dirty Pictures, which is about a generation of filmmakers who were very much inspired by the '70s, the '70s films. You know, Tarantino and Richard Linklater, Robert Rodriguez, people, Kevin Smith, people like
Wow, that sounds exciting. Darren Aronofsky,
that.
M. Night Shyamalan, those people are not.
Well, yeah, I haven't heard it from them attributed to them specifically, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, were they in the second book? Like the Wes Anderson, the ones
Oh,
that came late in the decade?
yeah, I think so, but it's again, as with Easy Riders Raging Bulls, it's been a while since I read it, so I don't want to say something for sure and then prove to be wrong.
I'll
But
say, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think that the '70s films, in some case, and even stretching that to the late '60s, I think it still has a very positive influence on filmmakers today. Although the commercial pressures that filmmakers face are much stronger now than they were back then.
I don't think sensationalizing in and of itself is necessarily a sin unless you are inaccurate with it. And that's a whole can of worms. Francis Ford Coppola said that he only interviewed people who hated him. And William Friedkin believed he was hated enough that he said that's okay with me. Um, what did it feel like if these were your heroes before you read the book to hear that your heroes, to hear the details of their sex and drug lives and stuff? Did you feel like they were taken down from a pedestal or,
Not really.
yeah.
Maybe if I think because I got into '70s films and I was already an adult, I didn't see any of these people as, as gods or anything. I knew that a lot of, filmmakers have various faults and some of the same thing in some cases. Some of what makes them a good filmmaker may not always make them a good human being. And it's not like I know any of these people personally.
Well,
I just
that's
have whether that they were true or not. It didn't really bother me.
if anything, I think it negates it shows how silly the Me Too movement is because we are way too strict of our filmmakers say. David O. Russell was a little mean to some people on the set, and he yelled at Lily Tomlin once, and people are trying to find little things like once he touched his niece's breast or something, and the Me Too movement also is a result of the negative Oscar campaigning, which is if your film is up against a David O. Russell film, you can attack by that. But I mean, it like think about Woody Allen. Like even if Woody Allen had some predatory sense of Sun Yi, which Woody denies. He said that they only went out once because Mia Farrow urged it. Peter Bogdanovich went after 20-year-olds all the time, and I think they said Dennis Hopper was hitting on his 18-year-old daughter's teenage friends. So like it seems one fault of the Me Too movement is it can be discriminate. Like if we don't like Woody Allen and we want to get Woody Allen, we'll go after Woody Allen, but we'll leave Peter Bogdanovich alone. And it seems like in the context of the 70s, everyone was doing everything. It was a freer decade. And I think as a mature adult filtering information, I can just say this is just stuff these stuff were doing when they were young. It wasn't perfect, but it was fairly evenly distributed, these crimes.
I do think that you need to judge everything in the context of their times and
Yeah.
standards have changed. Well, obviously there are things that were acceptable in the 70s or any decade, that are not acceptable now. At the same time, I don't think that you get a pass for doing things, uh, for sexual harassment or for various other things just because you happen to be a great filmmaker.
No, I don't agree with that, but it strikes me the way we've judged people is discriminate. That's a part of the Me Too movement. When the part of the Me Too movement is an element of the Me Too movement is being extrajudicial. It's like Kevin Spacey is now being tried in courts of law. That's good. But if Woody Allen was cleared of all counts by two separate independent juries, um, and if the Dylan Farrow, whether we I don't even know if we agree with that. I'm very convinced that he's innocent of that one. But in terms of the marriage to Sun Yi, who was 21 at the time, that was very common among his peers. So it seems like our judgment is can be discriminate. The media says focus on Woody Allen, let's make him a persona non grata, whereas Peter Bogdanovich lived out his days untouched by loving to be with 20-year-olds. So did Larry King for that matter, but
I mean, look, these were complicated men who led complicated lives.
yeah, no, I love that idea too.
I don't, um, but at the same time, while recognizing things within the context of their time,
Yeah.
I think you can also see things that were clearly wrong. Um, with just one example is that once the standards on sex and nudity uh, were expanded, then there were a lot of women that were coerced into doing things on film that they really didn't want to, and
Yeah, exactly.
there should have been someone to vouch for them and to make sure that they weren't being forced into something that they would later regret. I think that's how you'd want anyone to be treated.
Yeah, exactly. I would say there were two films that were pretty strikingly kind of unforgivable. Easy Rider and Apocalypse Now. The way that Dennis Hopper ran the production and terrified everyone, including his wife, his kids. Peter Fonda felt he was in personal danger. He got into a knife fight with Rip Torn. He broke into a hotel. Obviously, he was a person who was should not have been entrusted to direct a film. And Francis Ford Coppola in Apocalypse Now, I don't know how other people view it. I thought that was actually a pretty dangerous and unacceptable way to conduct a film. And that's an important thing too, is if you do something in your private life that's bad, that's one thing, but if you're sexually harassing people on set, if you are making people, if you're not following safety, if you are putting people in bad situations, I'm actually not even sure how Francis Ford Coppola survived that and maybe didn't even get arrested when he went back home. What
Well,
was
he
your
was.
reaction to either of these two situations? You've mentioned being conscious of film directors who do things wrong, so
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I can say about Coppola is that he's been very open about it. I mean, he was there was the landmark documentary Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse, with footage largely filmed by his wife that that doesn't pull any punches in terms of his behavior. Does is his behavior justified by the masterpiece that it resulted in? Wiser people than me would need to judge that. But one thing I can say is I love Hollywood history, going back to the studio system. I mean, I'm fascinated by it. I try to read about it. At the same time, there are of a lot of things went wrong, and a lot of people, especially women, were treated horribly. And then when they either and then they were either encouraged or required to sweep it under the rug, or when they did try to come forward, they were shamed and punished for doing that. We could have a whole other discussion about that.
yeah. I don't think it's
So I
just
think
women
whether it's the
because
70s, 60s, or any other decade, we can admire it, we can appreciate it while still recognizing that there were a lot of problems.
well, the case of Apocalypse Now, I don't think Ellie Coppola got treated very well because she played second fiddle to Francis Ford Coppola's mistresses. But the main victim was Martin Sheen, who had a heart attack, and the other crew members who endured all kinds of tropical diseases, and he didn't even put a doctor on set. And then I mean, I just read the part about how they buried a Filipino crew member in such a way that his body was floating up again. They didn't even give him a proper burial. That was somewhat disturbing. The Filipino, there was a couple Filipino crew members who died on set, but he put a lot of people's lives in danger. But
Yeah, I mean,
I agree
including
that,
he put his own life in danger. I mean, he's lucky to have survived that, given
um,
everything that happened.
and then for only 8 minutes of usable footage, the first time he did it, he fired one director, he fired one guy, came back, so that was a bunch of footage down this drain, yeah. And then he came back, and then he came back. I don't know how the studio ever allowed him to go back to the Philippines for a second or third time.
Yeah, I mean that was a a part of the decade that directors were given these budgets and this freedom that they had not been given before, and that to a large degree they haven't been given since.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
interesting.
some dir-
Although James Cameron certainly was able to toe that line with Titanic and then Avatar. Both were going to be big disasters, but they ended up making an enormous amount of money. But
yes, and I
some
think
people found a
there's
way with it.
probably filmmakers you can count on one hand that
Yeah,
kind of have the blank check.
yeah.
Him, Spielberg, Christopher Nolan, I think Ryan Coogler now after Sinners, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a couple, but
Joe and
for
Anthony Russo probably for the
yeah,
John
for
Favreau. You never know. And they're not necessarily John Favreau's not necessarily the most likely to win an Oscar or be recognized, but he gets a lot of results. I'd like to think James Mangold is in that conversation. I think he did excellent work with Logan and Ford vs. Ferrari and Indiana Jones and
yeah, no, I'm not saying those are the only good directors. I'm saying that just about every other director, it's like, okay, you can go this far, but no further
yeah,
financially.
absolutely.
And there's really only a small amount where they say, okay, go do whatever you want.
What's also interesting about the book is even if I didn't love the 70s, I felt like Peter Biskin might have liked it even less than I did because he's so pessimistic. He says Francis Ford Coppola he had three good hits. The Conversation, The Godfather, Godfather 2, and I'm like, wait, everyone thinks Apocalypse Now is genius. He talked about how William Friedkin burnt out after the 70s, but he did To Live and Die in LA, right? And he also did Killer Joe. Might have been before, after the publication of the book. He published it at a time when Paul Schrader hadn't made his comeback with First Reformed and The Card Counter, and I think he has a film this year. So, but he was basically like, oh yeah, they all burnt out. And I'm like, yeah, but a few of them kept making films. And Robert Altman, he did The Player and Shortcuts. So I felt like Peter Biskind was a little really pessimistic about these guys.
Yeah, again, you read it a lot more recently than I have, but yeah, he was, and I think he is looking to kind of take some of them down a peg. But you're right. I mean, Robert Altman, by the end of the 70s, he was pretty much persona non grata. He had, the second half of the decade, he had a lot of films that did not do well, and you know, the 80s were largely a struggle for him, and then, as you said, he did have the comeback in the 90s. Scorsese, the 80s are pretty tough for him too. And he also, it was the 90s, not that he didn't have good films in the 80s, but it was the 90s where he kind of went back to the esteem that he had in the 70s. Yeah, the 80s were tough on a lot of these filmmakers.
I was assuming that The Color of Money was a success, but I might have to check.
The Color of Money was a success. I mean, among other things, it got Paul Newman his long-awaited Best Actor Oscar, and it did pretty well financially. It was a good pairing between the older Paul Newman and the up and coming Tom Cruise. I think, there's an excellent documentary about Scorsese now on Apple Plus, simply called Mr. Scorsese. He views it as he views himself as a director for hire for that one, where it wasn't something that he initiated that was really personal to him. He wanted to do that in part because he wanted to show that he could direct a big budget movie and that he was still relevant.
It was
And
also
also because he wanted to make The Last Temptation of Christ, which he tried to make for years, and then after The Color of Money, he was finally able to make
I
that.
would probably that sounds like a very horrible move, like a horrible idea commercially. Like that I couldn't imagine that going well. Like come on, like Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, like very few people will want to watch that outside of the church community. I imagine you watched it because you're in love with Scorsese. You'll watch anything he makes, but I'm not gonna watch a film about the killing of Christ, a graphic novel about it. Although maybe it's fine.
Yeah, it took me a while to get to that. I certainly didn't watch it when it came out, when I was a teenager.
I
It's
thought
not
that
my favorite. It's not my favorite Scorsese film. I like their performances and can understand why it meant so much to him.
yeah, absolutely. He was
Obviously,
great.
I'm not the target audience.
I
I'm
would say
not the
that
target audience for that.
I thought that it was so interesting. A couple things that were interesting about Scorsese was that he and Altman, he had a story about, well, like, I guess at some point when actually it was 2012, Scorsese wrote a couple tribute pieces to Altman on the anniversary of his passing, and one was about how the two were on a yacht. At the same time, they both had meetings with the same studio about how their projects were rejected. And they were commiserating about how Hollywood just isn't what it used to be. And he said they said they really they liked each other a lot, but they were also different generations. So one was a bit more mentor to the other, you know. But Scorsese actually, I thought it was interesting that he went over the endings of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore in New York, New York, over and over again, and he strikes me as like a Woody Allen kind. He seemed like a nervous wreck over whether he got the movie right. And he was a little bit like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, where they couldn't bear to see the receipts on Star Wars, so they escaped to a beach in Hawaii or something.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the 70s, when he was, trying to establish himself. He's sort and even now, he's in his 80s and he's, in his eminence phase, he still has that nervous energy. I
Really?
think he still feels that he has to, you know, he's not one of, even today, he doesn't get a blank check.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, he doesn't want, he's not, we already know. I mean, because his wife spoke to us and said that Marty Scorsese would not ever retire. He would just make movies till the end of his life. So he would probably would, if his career stopped tomorrow, he probably would have a problem with that. I think
Yeah,
it's the same thing about Robert Altman said that there is no such thing as retirement. There's no such thing as anything but death is death, which is funny because his very last film actually was about death with Prairie Home Companion.
yeah.
But
And he died not too long after it came out, I think a few months.
yeah,
In fact, his health was so iffy on that last film that Paul Thomas Anderson, who was a great admirer of Altman, was kind of on standby that in
oh
case
my
something
God.
happened with Altman that he could step in. Thankfully that he didn't have to do that.
So let's ask a question here. If you had, I once asked you if you had to pick a director that you would want to see the life story of, who would you want to say? And you said Scorsese, and I said that because Scorsese, there's such a hagiocracy around him, it wouldn't be that interesting. The thing that saves Scorsese from the hagiocracy is that he uses all his energy to praise every other person other than himself. It would feed into the sort of egotistical thing that people have of him. The question is there anyone else in the book whose life story you think would be interesting? Because I have one answer that I think would be really good, but what would your answer be?
It's a good question. I mean, yeah, normally I would say Scorsese, but I've seen his life story now. I mean, the documentary
Yeah.
that Rebecca Miller did an excellent job chronicling that. Um, I don't know. Trying to, who had the most interesting? Um, Probably Coppola. Um,
Yeah.
because I mean, I feel that, yeah, I know a lot about what he did on Apocalypse Now, but he had so many other different he started in the 60s. He wrote a film or he did a film with Fred Astaire.
I like that film. Finian's Rainbow, I saw it. Yeah, with Petula Clark.
Yeah,
It's very for hire. It's very by the book, but it could be easily be a Vincent de Minnelli film, but
yeah, Dorothy Arzner, who's one of the few female directors during the studio era, was a teacher of Coppola's at USC, and Coppola has repeatedly credited her for convincing him to stick with it. He said that he was just willing to give it up and walk away, and she said, "No, you've got it. You'll be okay. Just keep at it." And then between that and the Godfather movies and Apocalypse Now, and then everything he went through in the '80s, it just seems like a fascinating life that I'd love to learn more about.
that is fascinating that because he's one of those people just like, that like Robert Altman or Scorsese or Eastwood or whoever who will make films till who's never not making films.
I mean, look, I wasn't a big fan of Megalopolis, but I admire the courage
It was
and the
ambitious as
commitment,
anything, and I like
yeah,
ambitious.
that it
Absolutely.
took to make it. I mean, he sold off a lot of his assets. He
Yeah.
he literally put everything he had in that, and
Filmmaking,
I
everything.
proud to.
So mine is Bogdanovich. Even though I haven't seen any of his movies, I love the stories about him. I mean, he was a humongous filmmaker who got to Hollywood meeting his idols. Like that's he met his idols and then he put Orson Welles up in his house I love the idea that him and Polly Platt went to the Directors Guild Association, built their annual whatever their hall, and they would just steal bread rolls and stuff to subsist on for their meals. And he would go. He was. They were pretty much the quintessential starving artist until they made it, you know. And I love that he learned all this knowledge to ingratiate. It's a little like How to Succeed in Business Without Ever Trying, where you just kind of know stuff about the your heroes, and then you ingratiate yourself with your heroes. And then there's these downfalls and the sort of he had a girlfriend who his wife who got murdered. I don't know if you remember that from the book.
Yeah, Dorothy Stratton.
And
Yeah.
then he had a very nice he at least was generous he at least was on good enough terms with Polly Platt to have a working relationship with him. Still had a good relationship with his kids. He had a love affair with Sybil Shepherd, which I think sounds really interesting. Um yeah, and he also was interesting in the 80s. Some other director put him up because he was too poor to afford his own place. So like he fell on some really hard times. I don't know what he I think he had a deal with Netflix towards the end of his life. So who would have known what that last movie would have been like? But it's quite an arc. And I think I could give it enough of a happy ending, that I could probably make a good movie out of it.
Well, in that case, I'd recommend two podcasts. The first one is TCM's podcast, and I'm blanking on the name now. But anyway, yeah, if you just Google TCM podcast, you'd see it. The first season, they have a few, is Bogdanovich recounting his life and a career, both in terms of him work as a historian with some of John Ford
Yeah.
and Orson Welles, and then also um, his own directing career and its various peaks and valleys. The other one is a podcast called "You Must Remember This" by Karina Longworth, who's a film journalist and historian who's actually married to Ryan Johnson. But
Oh, wait, I thought Rian Johnson was married to Greta Gerwig.
no, that's Noah Baumbach.
Oh yeah, that's a really good. I would love to interview them both at the same time. That'd be a really good. But that's off topic because they're not
Yeah.
70 directors. But yeah,
So there was a season of You Must Remember This, where Longworth devotes it to Polly Platt's life,
yeah,
both
she was.
as her work with Bogdanovich early, and then later she went on to work with other filmmakers, most notably James L. Brooks.
Yeah, and you also have to give George Lucas credit for he didn't he didn't get in the way of his wife's career and supported her for he she worked with Scorsese and I think she later worked with the guy who did The Paper Chase or something. Um, there were a few women in this time that kind of thrived a little bit alongside their husbands. I mean, Ali Coppola even got to direct a movie at some point. Um, with Peter Bogdanovich, also there's a great story I remember where because we're people who appreciate film, where he appreciated film too. Dennis Hopper was with George Cukor at a dinner with one of Peter Bogdanovich's mentor, and Dennis Hopper was like, "Oh, you're just an old man. You don't have any insight. I can do things way better. I can run circles around you." And Peter Bogdanovich, I think he like punched him or something. Do you remember that? They got into like
No,
at that dinner.
I didn't hear that one.
But they stopped. They didn't want to talk to Dennis Hopper after they insulted George Cukor. So he was like, "Don't mess with the legends." We're gonna wrap up pretty soon. The last thing I guess I could say is that
Uh, if I could go back, The Plot Thickens was the TCM podcast I was referring to, the one where they
with Polly
devoted the
Platt, that would
season.
be really interesting. Yeah.
Well, that was the one on Bogdanovich, and then You Must Remember This is the one that did Polly Platt.
Wow. I mean, she actually worked on The Paper Chase too, it was another 70s movie I liked with John Houseman. Lastly, oh, I think Peter Bogdanovich actually could have been a good TCM host. Forget
He did a lot of stuff with
he could have
he
hosted
wasn't a
The
regular
Essentials or
host, but
whatever.
he was a guest on TCM pretty frequently.
Oh, that is good. Yeah, because I mean, I imagine you still have this historical thing. I'm sure that and I think one other thing about the book is that they might have been fighting at the time, but I think when you see him at later ceremonies and AFI awards, like Scorsese, Coppola, Lucas, all those guys seem to have, Bogdanovich, freaking, they all kind of are friends now. I feel like that's a sign of their maturation. That, I feel like this sort of free swinging 70s style, I think it isn't indicative of who they are now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them have kind of retired either officially or unofficially. I mean, George Lucas is primarily focused on the new museum. De Palma, you don't see as much.
De Palma's all over the place. He was in
Um,
a movie too. De Palma was in movies all throughout the 2000s and 2010s. William Friedkin made a movie the year he died with Donald Sutherland, a remake of the Caine Mutiny, right? All those people,
with Kiefer Sutherland.
sorry, yeah,
Kiefer,
all these people work
yeah,
to their deaths. I think
yeah,
Brian De
yeah, yeah.
Palma's
De
not going anywhere.
Palma. I mean, I don't want to say De Palma's not doing anything. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, yeah, you don't see him that much anymore. Incidentally, there's also a very good documentary about his life
And
and
Brian De Palma was the person who survived the 80s pretty well, because didn't he have that one you think that well, he had Scarface, right? He had Carrie. He had a bunch of these
yeah.
the
Well,
Dead
Carrie
Body
was in the
Heat or something.
'70s. Yeah, and then he did. Um, yeah, he actually he had a very um, prodigious '80s. With a blowout, Dress to
Blowout.
Kill, a
Yeah.
blowout, and Body Double, and then his big hits were Scarface, and then The Untouchables.
Exactly. And then he also helmed the first Mission Impossible. So
Yes, in
that
the
was a
'90s.
big step to kind of inducting the Hollywood era. I'm sure that the Mission Impossible 2025 owes a debt of gratitude to him too, because it's not really stylistically any different. Just Tom Cruise is still kicking and being old, but it's pretty much the same movie 8 times over. Well,
Yeah, I mean, right. If the first movie had failed, who
yeah.
knows what might have happened? But
Uh,
it did.
yeah, so I think this was a really good talk. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Uh, Not really, except that I would encourage, whether it's the '60s or the '70s, that if anyone watching this is interested to go and find these films
Yeah.
because they're really worth your time, and you find a lot of gems that you may not have known about. And thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Did the book, well, I would say it's different for me because the book has directed me to films that I didn't might have like the book you already knew about the films before the book came along. I don't know if the book will get you excited about the films, but yeah, it's definitely a whole different angle. All right, thanks so much, Adam. And hey, we'll see you at the next film talk. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Take care.